Thank you everybody for joining us today on our webinar about bringing pollinators back. So our speaker today is Regina. She is a reference librarian and an organic grower. She has been an avid gardener since the age of 8, and she founded Seed Sower Farm in 2009. In 2017, she established Nassau County's first seed library at Glen Cove Public Library, and she created programs and workshops on sustainable landscaping. Along with practical experience as an organic farmer, Regina has completed numerous courses in horticulture at the Farmingdale State College. In 2024, Regina joined Xerces Society as a volunteer ambassador, where she works to advance into invertebrate conservation by participating in community science, organizational tasks, and community engagement. And a little bit about Xerces Society. It is founded in 1971, and the full name is Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. And it is an international nonprofit organization that protects the natural world through conservation of invertebrates and their habitats. And it is named for the Xerces blue butterfly, which was last seen flying in 1943. So welcome, Regina. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can share your presentation. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to learning so much today.
Terrific. Well, thank you. And I just want to first thank Rewild Long Island for hosting this presentation. It might be like I was saying that I'm preaching to the choir, because I know a lot of you Rewilders know a lot about our environment and how important it is to support invertebrates and pollinators and beneficial insects. But I'm hoping that you'll learn something new today, and maybe you can share it with your neighbor. So in 1971, the Xerces Society was established, and as Dee mentioned, it was named after the Xerces blue butterfly, which was the first butterfly to go extinct due to human activities. It was last seen in 1943 in the Presidio region of San Francisco. This image that you see is from John Comstock's Butterflies of California. And 15 years later, the Xerces blue butterfly disappeared after it was published. So our main office of Xerces is located in Portland, Oregon. There's about 100 staff scattered across the United States in about 25 of the United States states. But internally, we're divided into teams. Pollinator conservation, endangered species, agricultural biodiversity, pesticide reduction, outreach, etc. But collectively, we work to create habitat, creating on-the-ground changes in our landscapes. We provide advice, information, management plans, etc. We work for pesticide reduction, making habitat safer. We provide advocacy and technical guidance on that. We are involved in species protection. We gain legal protection for declining species. And we do research. Everything we do is research-based. We do rare species surveys, pesticide contamination tests, measuring carbon sequestration from habitat, etc. So science underpins everything that the Xerces Society does. It informs our work so that we can provide practical solutions that work. But Xerces also extends beyond its staff of 100. There's many thousands of Xerces Society members and individual donors in 15 countries, 15 plus countries, I should say. We work with private foundations and business partners who also support our work. We have ambassador outreach volunteers like myself, and always looking for more of those. We have community science volunteers. We work with Bee City USA and Bee Campus USA affiliates, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on. We work with scientists in universities around the world, federal, state, local agencies, farmers, neighborhood groups, and many others. And just people like you who want to help protect invertebrates and in our neighborhoods. Xerces is supported by an amazing community of members who make our work possible. And for any members who are watching today, I want to say thank you. And if you'd like to become a member, you can do so at xerces.org/join. So why do we care about pollinators? Well, there's so many reasons to care about them. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about pollination in general. I'm sure most of you are already familiar with this. So pollination is basically the transfer of pollen grains from the stamen, which is the male part of the flower, the anther in particular, to the female part of the flower, which is the pistil and the stigma. Flowers rely on wind, water, insects, bats, and birds to achieve pollination. But 85% of flowering plants require a pollinator to move that pollen to fertilize the flower. And here in this picture, you see this. This is a moth. It's a skipper, actually. It's like one of those insects those butterflies that are like a cross between a moth and a butterfly. And it's one of many pollinators out there. So I'm sorry, let me just go back. Perfect. Okay. One of the main reasons we need pollinators is for food production. So about 1 in 3 mouthfuls of food that we eat is available to us thanks to pollinators. And that equals to more than $30 billion of value in crops in North America. And I don't think we really often think about it. We go to the grocery stores and we walk through the aisles and we just assume that this is there by some magical enactment. But generally speaking, we're talking about pollinators providing us a third of our food. So this is a great image that really illustrates how important pollinators are. This is a picture of Whole Food markets in their produce section. A few years ago, they wanted to show customers what would happen if we didn't have pollinators. And when they removed those 237 of the 453 products, this is what the store looked like. So 52% of the produce items normally sold in the store, which included apples, avocados, eggplants, and squash, are removed from the shelves here. And you can see the difference. And I'll just pop back so you can see what those shelves look like before and after without pollinators. So this is what we could potentially see if we don't take care of our insects. So insects really, really do matter. And it doesn't just stay in the produce section. When we talk about dairy, pollinators are really, really important in dairy because cow feed, which is basically oftentimes alfalfa, that's a grain, it's a grass of some sort, require pollination by insects. And this is the dairy section at Whole Foods. Before, that shows you what we will have available to us with pollinators. And then here is that same dairy section without. So I think it's definitely a pretty obvious difference when we think about life without pollinators. So we just saw how important pollinators are to support human diets, but they also support wildlife. As obvious one would be birds. Birds eat fruits and seeds. It makes up a majority of their diets. And at this time of year, in spring in general, and probably through the summer, 96% of birds in America rear their young on insects or other arthropods. The Carolina chickadee, you might be all aware, it eats a lot of seeds in the season when it's not breeding. But every day, a single pair of Carolina chickadees have to bring in between 390 and 570 caterpillars to their nest for their nestlings. And this continues for 16 to 18 days. So they could be potentially collecting up to 10,000 caterpillars just to raise that one brood. And we're not talking gigantic caterpillars. I know we often think about the ones that are crawling on our cabbages or maybe a monarch caterpillar, but some of these guys are really, really small. I mean, you've probably walked through your driveway and maybe saw a tiny little caterpillar hanging from a thread. Those are the ones that they're grabbing too. So it's really, really important to consider that for the birds of the spring. Also, bears in the summer will eat up to 40,000 miller moths a day. these moths have enough fat content in them that they count for about a half a calorie per moth. So that means that 20,000 calories of just moths can be consumed by a rock-turning grizzly bear every single day. And of course, fish also rely on insects for food. Besides that, pollinators make our lives more beautiful. We have springtime flowers. We have summer berry picking because of pollinators. We have the decorations that we typically rely on for the Halloween and Thanksgiving times of year. And of course, we would never have pumpkin pie without pollinators. So let's talk a little bit about pollinator diversity and natural history. So the main groups of pollinators that we have are butterflies, moths, flies, beetles, wasps, and bees. But today we're going to focus on bees. And they're really the most important group of pollinators. With the exception of a few species of wasps, only bees deliberately gather pollen to bring back to their nests for their offspring. And in the process, they're pollinating, obviously. Bees also exhibit behavior called flower constancy, which means that they repeatedly visit one particular plant species on any given foraging trip. So they may visit hundreds of flowers on that trip, transferring pollen the entire way. In contrast, butterflies, moths, flies, wasps, and beetles visit flowers to feed on nectar, or the flower itself in the case of beetles, and not necessarily to collect pollen. So as a result, they come into contact less frequently with the flower's anthers than the bees do. So bees are really the linchpin for pollinators for us. So the pollen transport can happen one of two ways. Some bees carry something called a pollen basket, also known as the corbicula, on its rear legs. And it's a moistened kind of clump of pollen. It looks like a blob. And then other bees have pollen brushes or a scopa on the rear legs or abdomen or thorax of their bodies. And that's how they carry pollen. So we're talking about bees. We're not talking about honeybees in particular. Honeybees are different from native bees, and that's really who we are really trying to support. And in doing that, we're supporting honeybees too. But honeybees are not like our typical bees. Almost all of our native bees, except for bumblebees, are solitary bees, which means they don't aggregate. They don't live in communities. And only honeybees create in excess of honey. Bumblebees produce just enough to keep the colony alive when the weather is bad and to keep them going for a few days. And this is not a typical person, clearly. The Western honeybee is the first bee to come to mind when we think about bees, but and they're really, really important for crop pollination. And beekeeping itself has its own issues, but they are not native bees. They were introduced to North America, and they're more like a domesticated livestock. And they do, in fact, compete with native bees for honey, for pollen, and for resources. The next thing I want to do is just talk to you a little bit about the difference between a bee and a wasp. Sometimes bees are hard to tell apart, but I think according to this image, you could probably see that most of the time they're easy to tell from a wasp. So bees, as I mentioned earlier, have pollen-carrying structures on them somewhere. They're fuzzier, they're hairier, whereas wasps have a few hairs and no pollen-carrying structure. Bees, of course, are also herbivores. I guess they just eat pollen and nectar, whereas wasps are carnivores. They'll eat other insects. They'll go after your turkey sandwich, but they're omnivores. They'll actually eat insects. Actually, they're not omnivores. They're carnivores, I should say. So that's the difference there. And telling bees apart from flies is a little harder. These guys are just so small, it's hard to hard to really spend a lot of time identifying the difference. But bees have elbowed antenna, a longer antenna with sides on the head of, with eyes on the side of their heads, and they have those pollen carrying structures and 2 pairs of wings. Whereas a fly has a tiny antenna, they have large eyes, no pollen carrying structures, and only 1 pair of wings. The more you observe in your garden about what you might have, the sooner then you'll actually get to really understand the difference between what you're looking at. But some flies look a lot like bees. So native bees are mostly solitary, as I mentioned. They're gentle and they're unlikely to sting. And that's because solitary bees are not protecting a nest or a stash of honey, and they don't typically sting unless they're provoked. Only social bees such as honeybees and bumblebees are likely to sting in defense if their nest is disturbed. The number of bee species that we have here in the United States is around 3,600. New York in general, we have about 450 that last count. And on Long Island, it's a little bit of a question mark. I think last year I found 300 species of Long Island, but I couldn't repeat that search this year. And when I spoke to people at Xerces, they were really not sure about how many were on Long Island either, although one of the experts did mention that he thought it was around 300. And in your garden, well, that just depends on how you manage your garden. Hopefully you have many species. You may not have 300 species, but hopefully you have a good number of species in your own garden. And of course, that we're going to talk about how you can make this a more plentiful number in your garden today. So the diversity of bees is really astonishing. They come in every shape and size, all different colors, etc. This image actually shows the largest and smallest bees in North America. The larger bee there is actually a valley carpenter bee, and the bee that's on top of that bee is actually called the little lost bee. That bee is so small it can actually turn around in a lowercase letter O with no problem. So that's pretty tiny. These are both found in California. Bees, as I mentioned, come in a range of colors. They go from dull black to bright metallic green or blue. They have markings in red, orange, white, black, brown, and yellow. Some don't even look like bees. They're not very fuzzy. They're very tiny, and they may not be yellow and black. This is actually a cuckoo bee, which is so tiny. It is actually so tiny, you can see how big it is in comparison to the size of a dime. So I mentioned already several times now that bees have a pollen carrying structure. It's either got that pollen brush like this bee in this picture, or it could have the pollen basket. This bee actually has this is a longhorn bee, which has it kind of underneath its body, but generally somewhere under the body or on the legs, you'll see some kind of a pollen basket. This bee is a big mouth bee. It's a leafcutter bee, and this has it on the underside of its abdomen, the pollen collection. And so they look different in all parts of their body. So this is the head of a bee. Bees have 5 eyes. They have 2 large compound eyes, which are used for vision, just like we use our eyes for vision. They can see most of the light spectrum we can, plus ultraviolet colors, although they don't seem to see red very well. And then on top of the head of the bee, you can see those 3 small simple eyes called ocelli. And those are really meant to detect light and dark. Now, this bee in particular has pretty large ocelli because it's active at night. Some bees are actually active at night, and it would need to detect light using those eyes. Different species of bees have different tongue lengths, so that's why it's kind of important to have different types of flowers in your garden. Those with long tubular, some bees are more suited to go for tubular flowers. to reach the nectar, and they have these long noses, and some bees have very short tongues where they can only reach the nectar on shallow flowers. So those composite flowers like sunflowers and daisies and all of those kinds of flowers are really great for short-tongued bees. So here's just an image of a number of different types of bees. I'm going to go through it very quickly. I mean, this is not a test. You don't have to memorize this, but it's just to give you a sense of kind of what kinds of bees are out there and their different shapes and sizes. So, of course, we have the bumblebee on the upper left. I'm going to go in clockwise order from the top. They're big, hairy, colorful. They're probably the most recognizable bee we know. Mining bees are brown and pretty nondescript. They almost look like a little bit of a fly. Metallic sweat bees, they've got that green jewel-like color and they shimmer. Small sweat bees, they're tiny and drab. Furrow bees, which are dark and striped, again, looks a little bit like a fly. Sunflower bees, which have hairy legs and they have a huge pollen load usually. The longhorned bee, which we just saw previously, with super long antenna, hence the name. And then the small carpenter bee, tiny, dark. They're a little. They look a little bit like dark green glass. And then here are some more bees. So you can see there's a great range of different kinds of shapes and sizes and colors. And there are so many different bees out there, but we're going to just move along to natural history. So natural history of bees. What do they do? What are their life cycles like? So the life cycle of a bee is basically that similar to that of a butterfly. It starts with an egg, which hatches out and becomes a larva, which is the kind of worm-like creature. Then it goes into a pupa, and then finally it emerges as an adult. And this takes about a year to complete. So hence the reason why we're really going to focus on habitat and giving them opportunities to nest. So 90% of our native bees are solitary bees, which means they're gentle and they're not defending a nest in general, but they do need some special care. Females actually work on their own to create a nest and supply that nest. She creates the brood cell and supplies it with nectar and pollen. This is unlike bumblebees. Bumblebees generally, and I'll talk about that later, they have the queen who lays eggs and then has some workers for her for all of that work later on. So the female bee in the native solitary bee lays the egg, seals the cell, and this is really the last time she's going to have contact with her offspring. The larva hatches and starts to feed on this little pollen ball, this little bee bread, they call it sometimes, and then eventually it'll transform into a pupa, and it'll remain in the cell for the rest of the year. And then it'll emerge in the spring during the same season when the mother was active. So the adult phase is only about 4 to 6 weeks. That's when you'll see them flying around. And in an adult stage, they're basically just reproducing, as I just noted. Different species are active at different times of the year. And mining bees, which are those ones that come up in late winter and early spring, you'll see them nesting in the ground. They come up late winter, early spring. So bees really need access to soil, and that's because 70% of our native bee species nest underground. And if you look at these nests, you can kind of see that upper right picture. It almost looks like an ant nest, and you might be mistaking it for an ant nest. They can be found in turf, but more often these nests are found in exposed ground. They prefer sandy to loam soils, but will also nest in clay too. Oftentimes these nests are south-facing. And you can promote ground nesting by leaving areas undisturbed with patches of bare soil. Relatively undisturbed conditions will allow bee nests to become well-established, and they will be enhanced with the addition of key native flowering plants and other nest materials. So it's really important that if you find a nest, it's to leave it in place. Keeping areas of your property free of plant material is really kind of important if you want to encourage some nesting on your property. And trying not to mulch everything from end to end is also important. Bees also nest in trees and dead branches. About 30% of our native bees are solitary individuals that create wood tunnels, usually hollow stems or abandoned holes made by beetles found in dead trees or stumps. So this is there's a couple of images here of a bee that's got a cavity in a tree, it looks like to me. And then those images on the bottom, the right, the image on the top would be a leaf cutter bee. And you can kind of see where the leaf, they use portions of leaves to kind of separate the different cells in that picture. And then the second image on the bottom is the blue orchard bee. So as diverse as they are in shape and size, they need different kinds of nesting materials, including pieces of leaf, as I just mentioned, petals, mud, fine pebbles, sawdust, or even tree resin. So damp ground or mud puddles and a variety of native plants near the nests will be important for construction material. Mud, leaves, and petals, and will benefit butterflies that drink from puddles. Bee-riddled snags should be left for mason and leaf cutter bees. So if you have like trees on your property that maybe no longer living but are standing, if you can leave them safely there, that would be great. And the suggestion is really to maintain existing plants or grow additional plants that provide nesting habitat for bees. So these would be plants with stems that bees utilize as tunnel nests. So some examples would be sunflowers, sumac, wild rose, raspberries, blackberries, elderberries, ironwood, and cup plants. Oops. Did I do something? Okay. So the bumblebees are also social, but they're also ground nesters. So unlike honeybees, which exist in perennial colonies, bumblebees form annual colonies, and they're formed in the spring by a solitary queen. As I mentioned, the queen creates the first few brood cells from wax, and then she provisions them with pollen and nectar and lays their eggs. It'll take 4 to 5 weeks before the first eggs she lays become adults, and these will become the workers. They'll take on the tasks of foraging and helping the queen in her role with the nest. Workers generally live about 1 to 2 months, and then they'll be replaced by new workers. And the queen will just continue to lay eggs throughout the season. So that colony will continue to grow. At the end of the summer, new queens will emerge and drones will emerge, and they will mate. And because they have an annual cycle, they will only occupy that nest for 1 year. If they happen to use that nest again the following year, it's only by chance, because they generally do not overwinter in the same nest where they were born. So because of this, we encourage people who find nests on their property to please leave them, try to keep them in that space, and just understand that the life cycle of the bumblebee colony is the first step in understanding their unique habitat needs. So they have annual colonies that they usually make out of old rodent nests. So chipmunk or mouse nests are usually ideal. And sometimes it's also above the ground. They'll go into a hollow of a tree, in abandoned bird nests, in rock walls, or under a tussock of grass. But they mostly nest underground. So here are those bees again that we saw earlier. Just to give you an idea of how they basically nest. So bumblebees are social. They occupy a cavity, which could be the ground or in a tree. The mining bees are ground nesting. Those are the ones that come up very early spring. Sweat bees are ground nesting, and they share an entrance tunnel, but they have separate nests. Sweat bees are ground nesting, et cetera, et cetera. And here are some more. So a wide range of different looking bees doing different things at different times of the year. So of course, besides nesting, bees need flowers. They drink nectar from any flowers accessible, and they may be collecting pollen as well. But what's really important about this is to know that available blooms from throughout the season, and native plants in particular, are really important. And we stress native because these bees have evolved with these plants. They've evolved to, there are plants that support only one type of bee. And if that bee disappears or that plant disappears, then we're losing two potential species out there. If you can plant these plants in masses to make it more obvious to the bees, that would be helpful. There's this rule of 3 that you're probably familiar with, where you're planting a minimum of 3 plants of 3 different native species to bloom in 3 seasons. So planting, giving them something to forage on throughout the season, throughout the year, is really important, especially as they emerge at different times of the year, depending on the species. So threats, I think we all know what these threats will be, but I'll go through them. So habitat loss is a key driver of pollinator declines in general, and it can take a couple of different forms. One, it would be habitat loss, which would mean if a development goes up or there's intensive agriculture or landscaping that is not pollinator friendly. Another one is what would normally be perfect habitat, but it's been contaminated by pesticides. And a third factor is the loss of key plant species that pollinators depend on. Much like milkweed being really key to monarch reproduction, there are plants where, as I mentioned before, bees have evolved with, and if that plant is not available to that bee, neither of them will, the bee will definitely not, that species will definitely be in decline. This might be a little bit less obvious as habitat loss, but wall-to-wall lawn or heavily mulched areas eliminate any opportunity for ground nesting bees. And you might think, oh, well, mulch, how hard is that for them to get to? Bees have to, like, you know how tiny bees are. They have to nest, and if they nest in the ground, they're digging down a few inches, maybe 6 inches, and up to sometimes a foot. And that is a pretty arduous thing for such a small little animal. So consider leaving open some space. Pesticides are hugely important. And pesticide, the word pesticide is actually an umbrella term that includes insecticides, which of course kills insects, fungicides that kill fungi, which is really important in a very for communication and for sharing resources underground, and herbicides, which of course will kill plants. So this image that we're looking at here is actually jars with dead bees in it. There was this incident in Portland, Oregon back in 2013. Sadly enough, during Pollinator Week, there was some linden trees being that were in bloom, and they had aphids on them. And the Parks Department went through and sprayed those with an insecticide. And of course, if anyone's ever been through a linden grove or past the linden tree, you know it's buzzing with bees. So what happened was, of course, the pesticide moved through the sap into the flowers, and so 50,000 bees later were lost because of that. Now, the good news is that they can never use that the laws changed in Portland, and that pesticides can't be used on linden trees anymore. But it's just an indication of, it's just a good illustration of how we can avoid using pesticides to support these insects. And when we think about pesticides, we're often thinking about maybe agricultural use, but they're commonly used in urban areas as well. And pretty much it's the main goal for many of us in suburbia is for this cosmetic, perfectly manicured landscape. But eliminating that cosmetic pesticide is a really good first step to ensure a healthier environment for pollinators and other species. Another problem with pesticide use in a suburban built landscape is that impervious surfaces like asphalt and concrete, allows those pesticides to wash off and easily find their way into storm drains and our waterways. So limiting urban pesticides is a great step for water quality as well. And of course, climate change. Besides the extreme weather events like drought, which can lead to the destruction of habitat, and the temperature shifts can also accelerate flowering plant emergence, which may end up as a mismatch for emerging bees. So when we think about bees emerging at different times of the year, if a bee emerges in March or April and its plant is already, that it feeds off of, is already come and gone, it's basically a problem, right? We're not going to see a new population of that same bee without enough resources for it to use now. So I know we talked a lot about other things you can do, but we'll talk a little bit more. So what you can do besides managing those threats that I just spoke about, of course, you can be helping to support the entire life cycle of those bees. So that would include flowers, of course, nesting sites, protection from pesticides. And this will help all bees, and it will help all insects. It'll help all beneficial insects and birds as well. So letting some of your property go a little wild, and I know now I'm definitely speaking to the choir with a presentation to rewild. Letting your property go a little wild and advocating for the preservation of wildlands will really help pollinators. It's really unrealistic to undo outbuilt communities, but every little piece of habitat matters. So you might have a little strip of property out front by your sidewalk that you can plant. You can put a couple of pots of plants out. Anything will help. And if we all do it together, we're connecting up and we're able to create, an aggregate of resources for these animals. So of course, these include roadsides, parks, community gardens, eco roofs, power line easements, street landscaping, and of course our gardens. And bees don't need a lot of habitat. Even one plant can provide habitat. They also don't need nesting and foraging areas to be right next to each other. So if you think about what your neighbors have in your yard, what you have in your yard, if you have trees close by, all of these things can add up to be beneficial to these insects. So bees connect us, and they travel quite a ways, and they use different resources along the way. So this image just shows you how a bee might move around a neighborhood using small patches of habitat in different places. So what you do, what your neighbor does, what your friend down the block does, the parks department does, it all adds up. So together we can transform our landscape to make it better for bees. It just takes a little ingenuity and a little bit of effort. So whenever we create habitat, we should be trying to build a good structure that includes a variety of nectar sources. So this would include egg-laying options, shelter, et cetera. So this border has a number of plants that are native to the Northwest, but we have a lot of these plants that are similar analogs on Long Island. And they would be things like yarrow, milkweeds, coneflowers, blazing stars, asters, elderberries, raspberries, blackberries. So the easiest step, of course, is to help pollinators to grow pollinator-friendly flowers. So there are some flowers that are more attractive to our bees than others, but certainly whatever you wind up buying, if it seems attractive, make sure it is not been treated with pesticides. When you create a habitat that's got gorgeous flowers and you're bringing in all these pollinators, but they've been treated with pesticides, you're really just creating an ecological trap. So that's really important to consider. When you're planting, consider the diversity of bees that we have with different emergence times and flight periods. Social bees like bumblebees need consistent source of food throughout the season for the colony to build. So having something in bloom constantly from very early spring until the fall is really critical to support their lifespans. And of course, locally grown native plants are better. We have a number of locally native plant companies now on Long Island, so they're really easy to find. So supporting them will also support our beneficials. So the choice of plants, of course, is up to you, but just keep in mind that bees can see into ultraviolet light, but they cannot see the color red. And even though this picture is actually got a red, this flower's got a red center, that yellow is like a beacon to this bee. So it's landing in the right place ultimately anyway. But we're definitely looking to have diversity of color, bloom period. Native plants have been shown to show greater diversity and abundance of native bees. And native plants support vastly more butterfly and moth caterpillars, which of course are important for the birds. And then with climate change and shifting weather patterns, drought tolerance is really becoming more and more important. So native is best, and the species in this grid are appropriate for the maritime Pacific Northwest, but we would focus on plants that are native to Long Island in the Northeast. And some of these are, there are some analogs to this. So like Canada goldenrod, we have all kinds of goldenrod here that would be supportive of our bees. And asters, of course, are really a great resource to bees, especially later in the season. So the Xerces Society has a lot of different resources out there. This one is for the Pacific Northwest, but you could go onto the Xerces site, xerces.org, and type in publications, plant lists, and you'll find lists for the Northeast. And I can try to put that link into the chat. I'm gonna try to do that right now. I can't do it while I'm sharing. Okay, I'll try to do it later. I'll remember to go back and do it later. But there's plant lists for all parts of the country. And this plant list in particular is really great. You can't really see it, but it gives you like a little key on on what benefits that particular plant will have. And some of these provide nesting opportunities. They provide specific resources just to species of bees that are just really not our specialist bees or not generalists. So it's a really nice resource. It'll tell you when things bloom. It'll tell you the color of the bloom, the height of the plant. No, it doesn't tell you the height of the plant, sorry. It'll tell you the light source that you need, etc. So non-native plants have a role too. It's important to pick ones that are not going to become invasive in our area. So say you're looking to plant something that's native to the United States, but not necessarily native to the Northeast. That's okay as long as it's not going to, extend beyond its range and push out your natives. Annual plants are also kind of important, really important actually. Things like cosmos, zinnias, sunflowers are all beneficial to pollinators. So plants, nursery people are always coming up with the latest and the greatest hot plant to put out there, and sometimes they're really, really beautiful. But if you go to a nursery and you see no bees on it or no insects on it at all, then you can be pretty certain that those are not going to attract bees in your garden. So go for the plants that look like they're being attractive to bees. And ask if those plants have been treated with any kind of insecticides. Some insecticides persist in the plant and can be transferred to the pollen and nectar, which can be brought back to the nest and basically do harm there. Lawns. So we live on Long Island, which we really could spell L-A-W-N Island. Some of those lawns look like they could be small farms to me. And because their lawns don't really support pollinators much, they're really an ecological wasteland. So if you do grow a lawn, you don't have to necessarily grow an eagle lawn, but if you include things like clover, which was historically was the case for lawns at one time, lawn mixes, they did include clover. That'll give bees some foraging opportunities. And maybe consider reducing your lawn and adding native plants and shrubs and trees. Maybe you've heard about No Mow May. It was first promoted by Plant Life in Britain. The idea was that by not mowing, wildflowers would emerge in lawns and give bees some early sustenance. If it doesn't do that, at least it reduces the intensity of maintenance using fewer resources, water, pesticides, and can bring big changes. It's an opportunity too to make your gardening life easier and maybe less expensive if you have a landscaper. But No Mow May is not a one-size-fits-all initiative. May be too late for us. It may be too early for us here on the East Coast. And not mowing for a whole month might be too long. Flowers might get smothered by strongly growing grass. And we really do want flowering plants for the bees. So No Mow May is kind of growing, and that's good, but it only is a part of the answer. Allowing flowers to bloom briefly is just a temporary benefit. If you don't have flowers in your lawn at all, then there's really no point. And then you have to consider, what will the bees feed on when the mowing restarts? We need to be supporting those bees all year. But the other problem with no mow, and not a problem, but you need to communicate to your community that you're not abandoning your property. We live in a community, I don't know about you, but in my neighborhood, people are very manicured and things are very, very sterile and very tight. So looking over at somebody's property where the grass is 3 feet high might become an issue. So you need to communicate to your neighbors that you're doing this for a purpose, and then it may be a great opportunity to kind of open up a conversation about what they can do to support pollinators as well. So consider adding a sign if you're doing something like this. Rewild probably has signs, I guess, but you can make your own sign. Just make sure you're educating people about what you're actually doing, so they don't think that you're just abandoning your property or neglecting your property. We already talked about bees needing nest sites. But we'll talk a little bit more about that. So if you happen to have any kind of natural existing sites, retain those where you can. If you have any dead trees on your property that can be safely left where they are, that's always a great option. Even down trees. If you have trees that have fallen in, if you have a large piece of property and they've fallen and they're not a hazard to you or anybody else, consider leaving them. They're a great resource not only for bees, but for other wildlife. And try not to mulch every inch of your landscape. A few weeks ago, when the mulch comes out, the whole neighborhood smells like it. And you don't need to mulch every inch of your landscape. When you do that, you're eliminating an opportunity for a ground nesting bee to make a nest in your ground. There are lots of ways to create the ideal condition online. You can find information about that. But we don't know exactly what a lot of these species need. So just ensure that there's access to soil, and the areas don't have to be big. This upper picture here is an area of about 8 to 10 inches wide. It's like rocks next to a driveway, and there are holes under the rocks which lead to the bees' nest. And the lower photo shows patchy grass in a school field, where mining bees would probably be able to nest. Nest blocks. Nest blocks are easy to provide, and you can make them yourself. You can drill holes, etc. There's all kinds of information online about this. Basically, the larger the hole, the deeper they need to be. When bees actually make their brood cells, the last cells are males, and it's the cells at the back of that tube that are actually females. So the shorter the hole, you have the fewer females, and we do want a lot of females. These can be purchased online. You can make your own, as I mentioned. But keep in mind that they need to be cleaned out every year because there's disease that can build up. Whereas in a natural environment where if you have stems from plants, which I'll talk about in a second, those will easily break down. They'll degrade naturally and they won't need to be cleaned. But because these things are kind of long-term, you'll need to clean them every year. So natural nest sites, of course, take very little energy on your part. Leaving stems for cavity nesting bees, it's pretty simple to do. Bare ground for ground nesting bees, leaves, log piles, etc., are all beneficial to our pollinators and other insects. So when you do save your stems, it's like a 2-year cycle. And then we'll go through it from summer forward. So in the summer, the plant starts to grow. In the fall and winter, in the summer, the plant starts to grow. It'll send up flower heads. If you leave those flower heads on in the fall and winter, birds will actually feed on those seeds. So it's free bird seed. In early spring, so there'd be like March, April, end of March, mid-April, you'll go through and start either cutting or breaking the stems at varying heights between 8 to 24 inches. And what you're doing there is you're kind of mimicking what a deer would do by grazing on those stems of plants. And what'll happen then, the bees will be able to enter, they'll make their cells and make their nests. The plant now with this new summer growth will come up around those stems so you won't see them. And that process will continue. The bees will then, that made their nest there in the summer, early spring and summer, will emerge the following year. So these plants here, most of these are native here, are great options for stem nesting bees. So hyssop, purple coneflower, blazing star, bee balm, goldenrods of all kinds, asters of all kinds, raspberries and brambles, sumac and elderberry are all pithy stems. They have a little bit of an opening in there for the bee to get in and lay its eggs and close up those cavities. So those are great options if you don't have them. There's plenty of options out there. I'm not sure if Wild already had their plant sale, but they have plant sales every year, and I'm sure they include all of these plants. And as I mentioned earlier, if it's safe to keep a standing tree that's not alive anymore on your property, it's really helpful for the cavity nesting bees and also for homes for squirrels, birds, and bats. Leaves. Well, leaves are my favorite topic. I'm always amazed at what people are doing with leaves. They take them out and they take them away, and they're just an incredible resource to our garden for so many ways. And now, while a couple of inches of leaves on your lawn might kill your grass, which isn't a bad thing, I don't think. I think you could plant something there next time. A thin layer of leaves is actually beneficial to the lawn because it helps provide organic matter and nutrients to help that lawn grow. And it'll help build your soil and provide habitat. If you have some leaves in the spring, make sure you wait until late in the season to increase the chance of removing them. That increases the successful emergence of butterflies like queen bumblebees and butterflies and other overwintering animals. So here's just an example. Queen bumblebees overwinter underground. That layer of leaves kind of gives it a little bit of protection from heavy rain and snow. Woolly bear caterpillars tuck themselves into the leaves. There are fireflies really benefit from leaves because it creates a moist environment, and moist environments are where slugs and snails like to be, and that is their main food source. And then finally, birds also forage in those leaves. I can't tell you how many times I see the catbirds poking around in the leaves, pulling out caterpillars for their babies. So maybe they'll leave my blueberries alone a little longer because of that. So there's no police. There's no right or wrong way to do this. Do what works in your garden. Of course, try not to block drains. Don't create a slipping hazard. And don't keep them if there are disease issues. But generally speaking, just raking them onto your beds is a great way to go. If you choose to compost them or shred them, you're probably going to be removing any kind of overwintering soil life there. So I wouldn't recommend that. But if you have to, you have to. Some people have very large properties with a lot of deciduous trees. So you have to do what's right for you. And of course, if you're leaving your leaves, maybe you want to let people know why you're doing that. Because people tend to really like tidy properties throughout the winter now. And so leaving the leaves may be, again, a nice opportunity to educate people about why leaves are important for your landscape, for our environment. Sticks or log piles are really important. Again, they provide shelter for animals of all sorts. Think about the past winter we just had, all of that snow. I have some wood piles out on my driveway, wood that I'm someday going to burn in a fireplace. But the birds were living under there. It was like pretty heavy snow, and at least they had like little spots to kind of hide while that snow was just accumulating through the winter. So on the North Shore of Long Island, we have lots of rocks, and maybe you saw them as a nuisance before. I know the man who lived in my house before me used to bring boxes of rocks out to the curb every week practically, and I still have a bazillion rocks. But now I look at them a little differently, knowing that they can be supporting ground nesting bees. So rock walls and piles are really good to have for those cavity nesting bees. Butterfly host plants, of course, are important. They vary between species. Some will, and if your plant's being eaten, that's a good sign, by the way. You know, if you have a host plant for like a monarch, you have milkweed, it being chewed is definitely a good sign. It means that you have that butterfly is using that plant. Again, we'll talk about pesticide reduction. This photo is showing hundreds of bees on the ground beneath treated trees. They're a big issue. We have so many webinars on Xerces about pesticides and on our YouTube channel as well. And I will go back to the slide and throw that into the chat too. But just minimize wherever you can. Read the guidance carefully, and just know that there's limited protection for any kind of pesticide. And I particularly would like to point out those organic tick and mosquito companies out there. They are probably using a rotenone or some kind of broad spectrum organic pesticide, insecticide, but that does not mean that it's not going to affect our pollinators and our bees. And mosquitoes, as a side, actually can breed in a tiny little soda cap size piece of water, so a bit of water. So after it rains, just going out and tossing that water, dumping that water wherever you can is your best approach to getting rid of mosquitoes. Because if there's no place for them to lay their eggs, you won't be having a population. And when these guys come in with the sprays to spray, they're really just dealing with the adult population. It's not dealing with what's already been laid. So, and they are pesticides, and they're not beneficial to anybody at this point. And this is a big issue, the neonicotinoids out there. They really persist in the soil for months or years, or in the plants. So when you go to your nursery and you buy plants, ask if they've been treated. If they don't know if they've been treated, just go somewhere else for your plants. Because the last thing you want to do is create a beautiful environment to attract all these pollinators in, only for them to ingest a deadly poison. So the habitat you're creating for pollinators in your yard will also bring beneficial insects, obviously. The lady beetle, which is a great adult a great aphid-eating plant insect. I get them every year on my mock orange out front. And the lower plant is a smooth-winged flower fly, and that also hunts aphids. Already talked about this. If you're looking at some images, if you're looking at your leaves and they're a little chewed, that's okay. I mean, the plant will definitely survive. An infestation is a completely different thing, but most of the time, you're looking at what that plant was intended to do, being a host to that particular insect. And if you see round holes in your leaves, that's probably a leafcutter bee, which is really kind of fun to know. So beyond gardening, there are so many other things you can do. I hope I gave you some ideas on how to transform your landscape. But you can also look at other ways to let people know what you're doing and sign the pledge. Xerces has a Bring Back the Pollinators pledge, where you pledge to grow pollinator-friendly flowers, provide nest and egg laying sites, avoid using pesticides, and spreading the word. The sign is definitely to help you spread the word. You can purchase the sign at the Xerces Society if you're so inclined, but you can also just create your own, and that might actually be more effective. But you can go to bringbackthepollinators.org to learn more about that. You can get involved in community action. You can, if you're on a college campus or a corporate campus of some kind, you can talk to your administrators and see if you can create a pollinator-friendly environment right there. You can visit the website for more information there, bcityusa.org. You can get kids involved in conservation. Start early. X-Kids, which I believe is a free resource, is a great little workbook for kids from the ages in grades 3 to 5. But I have to say the writing is interesting enough for even an adult. And what it'll do is it'll walk the kids through basically all of the different aspects of pollinators and insects out there. And at the end, if they finish through the whole workbook, they can send in and say they did it, and they'll get a little patch that says they're a Xerces kid. So X-Kid, I should say. That's also available in Spanish, I should say. Community science, get involved with community science. Xerces Society has Bumblebee Watch, the Bumblebee Atlas, the Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper, which of course wouldn't apply to us. But if you can download the apps and just contribute by taking pictures of what you see, it helps scientists understand what's out there and when. And there are other organizations you can get involved in too. Rewild, of course, is one of them. There's lots of books, fact sheets, podcasts. These are all available probably at the public library. If you don't have it at your public library, you can ask them to get it from another one. But these are a couple of publications by the Xerces Society. You can even purchase them online if you'd like. They're really, really well-written, beautiful books. So many different resources available free to you for download, including that plant list I was telling you about, but just information about how to deal with mosquitoes, how to create nesting environments, how to make a pollinator-friendly yard, all kinds of resources available at xerces.org. We also have a Bug Banter podcast, which is about a half hour, and every week they feature an expert in the field of invertebrate conservation, and it's really fascinating to hear these people who are deeply involved with insects talk about their life cycles and their life history. And if you're hungry for more and you want to take a deep dive on other presentations and webinars developed by the Xerces Society, you can find them on the Xerces YouTube channel or at xerces.org. And if you're into the socials, you can follow Xerces on Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky. And then as a donor-supported not-for-profit net profit, members are critical to our work. So I would hope that you consider joining as a member. You'll get all kinds of you'll get monthly or bi-monthly updates on what's happening, both in conservation. And so I just want to thank you again for the opportunity to give a voice to our pollinators. I hope you will share what you might have learned today, and I'm happy to answer any questions. So with that, I will unshare. All right.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. A lot of information. I hope everybody, learned something new today. And the recording is going to be available on our website and YouTube channel. And I'm going to send the link to anybody who register early so you don't have to wait. And yes, I have the publication. And to be honest with you and everybody here, you do not have to get it right away. Like nobody get it right away. It kind of take a few years for it to sink in. As you gain more knowledge, you are going to understand each little thing better. But if you feel like you're reading a book and you have no idea what it's about and why, you're not alone. It takes time. So I find that as over the year, if I reread the book, I'm like, oh, I get it now. But a few years ago, I would not get it. Just so you don't be overwhelmed. Yeah, you're not alone in this. If you have questions also, just email us and we always answer questions. So in the chat, I have put in a few links and I'm going to put these links as we post up your webinar also about things that you have talked along the way about which plants to plant. There are a list of native plants that are great for specialist bees because some bees rely on one particular flower.
Right.
And if we don't have that particular flower, we do not have the bees. And there are many ways for you to create habitat in your garden. So all of that information is going to be posted. And if you have questions, please, either put them in the chat or unmute yourself or raise your hand actually. And we are going to ask you to, just unmute and ask your question. So we have one about herbicide. Do you have information about herbicide? I know you touched on it earlier because Nancy has lots and lots of poison ivy. So she wants to know if herbicide are safe.
So poison ivy is a tough one, and I don't really have a great answer for you. I would avoid using an herbicide. I mean, if it's specific to that particular problem weed, that's one thing. Poison ivy is really hard. I mean, do you have room for goats? Goats love poison ivy. That would be my first choice if I had this space and I had access to a goat. I would just say that if you're spraying it, be really careful. If it's something like a systemic herbicide, you may really want to consider what's around there. I actually have a couple of problem issues in my yard here. I have a tree that's growing right next to my house, but it's right next to my grapevines. And I know the best way I can deal with that is to cut it and then paint it with Roundup, which my husband was like, Roundup? I never thought that word would come out of your mouth. But I'm concerned about if it's something systemic and it's going into the root system, and you know that there's all this underground network of mycorrhizae and fungal connections, how is that going to affect the plants next to it? So that would be my one concern. There are people who do poison ivy removal. I know that's a bit expensive, but I don't know if I answered your question. But yeah, poison ivy is a problem. Poison ivy, even some natives like Virginia creeper can cause poison ivy conditions. I found out the hard way last year myself.
Yeah.
So I would just I don't know. I would suit up and cut it back and pull it out, but don't, whatever you do, don't burn it, you know, and every part of that plant, by the way, you know, probably, is got the, urushiol, which is that, oil that causes the skin rash. So
So supposedly you can rent a goat. There is a service to rent a goat.
there was a person who was renting out goats to do that. They were
Yeah.
doing it on like hilly areas. And, you know, goats can climb a hill, no problem. So yeah, there was somebody who was actually doing that. So I don't know who's got a goat. Maybe Long Island Game Farm. I don't know, but yeah, but they do eat poison ivy. They're really great with that. But it just, I think you might need, if you don't want to use the herbicide, you need to get a removal service in there, is what I would say.
We would always recommend to use hand removal method over herbicide because we do not know how long that herbicide is going to stay in the ground and
Yeah,
what else it may affect.
exactly.
So look into hand removal services if that's the best option that you can afford.
Yeah.
And the other option is obviously rent a goat. And after that, if all else failed, herbicide, you have to follow the label. That's the law. And be very careful with it.
Some people,
So
yeah, some people have also mentioned to me this vinegar thing that they use, or boiling hot water, or, but I think that's going to change uh, the soil composition too, to affect the soil life. So I would be always, I would always go with some manual method first myself.
so a lot of thank yous in the chat.
Oh, thank you.
We love that. And we do have a webinar on how to attract mason bee to your home. So those are the one that actually do stem nest, and you could do that. So all of this information is going to be sent to you on the email or on our website.
Great.
And yes, thank you again.
Okay, thank you.
And finally, on behalf of Rewild Long Island, I would just like to say thank you so much for joining us. Your support and the support of our wonderful sponsors really make educational webinars and all of our other programs possible. So thank you again so much. In particular, we would like to shout out the Green Tree Foundation, the Peter and Jerry DeJohn Foundation, the Long Island Sound Study, the New York Community Trust, the Community Chest of Port Washington, and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. We hope you enjoy this webinar and that you will join us for the next one.